A History of Dwarf Long-Nose. It is a great mistake to think that fairies, witches, magicians, and such people only lived in eastern countries at such times as those of the Caliph Harun al. Fairies and their like belong to every country and every age, and no doubt we should see plenty of them now, if we only knew how. In a large town in Germany there lived, some couple of 100 years ago, a cobbler and his wife. They were poor and hard working. The man sat all day in a little stall in a street corner and mended any shoes that were brought to him. His wife sold the fruit and vegetables they grew in, and her goods were temptingly spread out, as she had plenty of customers. The couple had one boy named Jim, a handsome, pleasant-faced boy of 12, and rather tall for his age. He used to sit by his mother in the market, and would carry home what people brought from her, for which they often gave him a pretty flower, a slice of cake, or even a small coin. One day Jim and his mother sat at the usual place in the marketplace, with plenty of nice herbs and vegetables spread out on the board, and in some smaller baskets early pears, apples, and apricots. Jim cried his wares at the top of his voice. "This way, gentlemen! See these lovely cabbages and these fresh herbs! Early apples, ladies! Early pears and apricots! Oh, the cheap! Come and buy!" As he cried, an old woman came across the marketplace. She looked very torn and ragged, and had a small, sharp face, all wrinkled, with red eyes and thin-hooked nose, which very nearly met her chin. She leant on a tall stick, and limped and shuffled, and stumbled along as if she were going to fall on her nose at any moment. In this fashion she came along till she came to the stall where Jem and his mother were, and there she stopped. Johanna, the herb seller?" she asked in a croaky voice as her head shook to and fro. "Yes, I am," said the dancer. "Can I serve you?" We'll see. Let me look at those herbs. I wonder if you've got what I want," said the old woman as she thrust a pair of hideous brown hands into the herb basket, and began turning over all the neatly packed herbs with her skinny fingers, often holding them up to her nose and sniffing at them. The cobbler's wife felt much disgusted at seeing her wares treated like this, but she dared not to speak. When the old hag had turned over the whole basket, she muttered, Bad stuff, bad stuff. Much better 50 years ago. All bad." This made Jim very angry. "You're very rude, old woman," he cried. "First you mess all of our nice herbs without your horrid brown fingers, and sniff them with your long nose till no one will care to buy them, and then you say it's no bad stuff, though the Duke's cook himself buys all his herbs from us." The old woman looked sharply at the saucy boy, and laughed unpleasantly, and said, "You don't like my long nose, sonny? Well, you shall have one yourself, right down to your chin." As she spoke, she shuffled toward the hampers of cabbages, took up one after another, and squeezed them hard, then threw them back, muttering again, "Bad stuff, bad stuff." "Don't waggle your head in that horrid way," begged James anxiously. "Your neck is as thin as a cabbage stalk, and it might easily break your head if you fall into the basket. Then who would buy anything?" "Don't you like thin necks?" laughed the old woman. "Then you shan't have any, but a head stuck close between your shoulders, so that it may not fall off for sure." "Don't talk such to the child?" asked the mother at last. "If you wish to buy, please make haste. You are keeping the customers away."
"Very well, I will do as you ask," said the old woman with an angry look. "I will buy these 6 cabbages, but as you see, I can only walk with my stick and can carry nothing. Let your boy carry them home for me, and I'll pay him for his trouble."
The little fellow didn't like this and began to cry, for he was afraid of the old woman. But his mother ordered him to go, for she thought it was wrong to not help such a weakly old creature. So still crying, he gathered the cabbages into a basket and followed the old woman across the marketplace. It took her more than half an hour to get to a distant part of the little town, but at last she stopped in front of a small, tumble-down house. She drew a musky old hook from her pocket and stuck it into the little hole in the door, which suddenly flew open. How surprised Jim was when they went in. The house was splendidly furnished, the walls and ceilings of marble, the furniture of ebony inlaid with gold and precious stones, the floor of such smooth, slippery glass that the little fellow tumbled down more than once. The old woman took out a silver whistle and blew it until the sound rang through the house. Immediately, a lot of guinea pigs came running down the stairs, but Jim thought it was rather odd that they all walked on their hind legs, and wore nutshells for shoes, and men's clothes, whilst even their hats were put on in the newest fashion.
"Where are my slippers, lazy crew?" cried the old woman, to hit about with her stick. "How long am I to stand here waiting?"
They rushed upstairs again and returned with a pair of coconuts lined with leather, which she put on her feet. Now all limping and shuffling was at an end. She threw away her stick and walked briskly across the glass floor, drawing little Jim after her. At last she paused in a room which looked almost like a kitchen. It was so full of pots and pans, and the tables were rich mahogany, and sofas and chairs covered with the richest stuff.
"Sit down,"
said the old woman pleasantly, and she pushed Jim into a corner of a sofa and put a table close in front of him.
"Sit down. You've had a long walk and carried a heavy load. I must give you something for your trouble. Wait a bit. I'll give you some nice soup, which you'll remember as long as you live."
So saying, she whistled again. First came the guinea pigs in men's clothing. They had tied a large kitchen aprons, and in their belts they were stuck cutting knives and sauce ladles and such things. After them hopped a number of squirrels. They too walked on their hind legs, and wore full Turkish trousers and little velvet caps on their heads. They seemed to be the scullions, for they clambered up the walls and brought down pots and pans, eggs, flour, butter, and herbs, which they carried to the stove. Here the old woman was bustling about, and Jim could see that she was cooking something very special for him. At last the broth began to bubble and boil, and she drew off the saucepan and poured its contents into a silver bowl, which she set before Jim.
"There, my boy," she said. "Eat the soup, and then you'll have everything which pleased you so much about me. And you shall have a clever cook, too. But the real herb you'll never find. Why had your mother not got it in her basket?"
The child could not think of what she was talking about, but he quite understood the soup, which tasted delicious. His mother had often given him nice things, but nothing had ever seemed so good as this. The smell of the herbs and the spices rose from the bowl, and the soup tasted both sweet and sharp at the same time, and was very strong. As it was finished, the guinea pigs lit some Arabian incense, which gradually filled the room with clouds of blue vapor. They grew thicker and thicker, and the scent nearly overpowered the boy. He reminded himself that he must get back to his mother, but whenever he tried to rouse himself to go, he would just sink back drowsily, and at last he fell sound asleep in the corner of the sofa. Strange dreams came to him, and though the old woman took off his clothes and wrapped him in a squirrel skin, and that he went about in the other squirrels and guinea pigs, who were all very pleasant and well-mannered, and waited on the old woman. He first learned to clean her coconut shoes with oil and to rub them up. Then he learned to catch the little sun moths and rub them to make the finest sieves, and the flour from them he made into soft bread for the toothless old woman. In this way he passed on one kind of service to another, spending each year till the fourth he was promoted to the kitchen. Here he worked his way up from underscullion to head pastry cook, and he finally reached the greatest perfection. He could make all the most difficult dishes, and 200 different kinds of pastries, soup flavored full of every sort of herb. He learnt it all, and learnt it well, and quickly. When he had lived 7 years with the old woman, she ordered him one day, as she was going out, to kill and pluck a chicken and stuff it with herbs, and have it nicely roasted by the time she got back. He did this quite accordingly to the rule. He wrung the chicken's neck and plunged it into boiling water, carefully plucked out all the feathers, and rubbed the skin nice and smooth. Then he went to fetch the herbs and stuff with it. In the storeroom he noticed a half-open cupboard of which he did not remember having seen before. He peeped in and saw a lot of baskets from which a strong and pleasant smell. He opened one and found a very uncommon herb. The stems and leaves were bluish-green, and above them was a little flower of a deep bright red, edged with a little yellow. He gazed at the flower, smelt it, and found it gave the same strange perfume which came from the soup the old woman had made him. But the smell was so sharp that he began to sneeze again and again, and at last he woke up. There he lay on the old woman's sofa, and stared about him in surprise. "Well, what odd dreams one does have, to be sure," he said to himself. "Why, I could have sworn I'd been a squirrel, a companion of guinea pigs and such creatures, and I'd become a great cook, too. How mother will laugh when I tell her. But won't she scold me, though, for sleeping away in the strange house instead of helping her at the market?" He jumped up and prepared to go. All his limbs seemed quite stiff in his long sleep, especially his neck, for he could not move his head easily. And he laughed at his own stupidity for being still drowsy that he kept knocking his nose against the wall and cupboards. The squirrels and guinea pigs ran whispering away from him, as though they would not like to go too. But he begged them to come when he reached the door, and they all turned and ran quickly back into the house again. The part of the town was out of the way, and Jim did not know the many narrow streets in it. He was puzzled at the windings and by the crowd of people who seemed excited for some show. From what he heard, he fancied they were going to see a dwarf, for he heard them call out, "Look at that ugly dwarf! What a long nose he has, and see how his head is stuck between his shoulders, and only look at his ugly brown hands." If he had not been in such a hurry to get back to his mother, he would have gone too, for he loved shows with giants and dwarfs and the like. He was quite puzzled when he reached the marketplace. There sat his mother, with a good deal of fruit still in her basket, and he felt he could not have slept very long, but it struck him that she was sad, for she did not call the passer-bys, but sat with her head resting on her hand, and as he came near he thought she looked paler than usual. He hesitated what to do, but at last he slipped beside her and laid a hand on her arm, and said, "Mummy, what's the matter? Are you angry with me?" She turned around quickly and jumped up with a cry of horror. "What do you want, you hideous dwarf?" she cried. "Get away! I can't bear such tricks!" "But, mother dear, what's the matter with you?" repeated Jim, quite frightened. "You can't be well. Why do you want to drive your son away?" "I've said get away already," replied Hannah, quite angry. "You won't get anything out of me by your games, you monstrosity." Oh dear, she must be wandering in her mind," the lad mused to himself. "How can I manage to get her home?
Dearest mother, look at me close. Can't you see that I'm your son Jim? Well, did you ever hear such impudence? Cried Hannah, turning to the neighbor. Just see this frightful dwarf. Would you believe he wants to think he is my son Jim? Then all the market women came round and talked all together and scolded as hard as they could, and what a shame it was to make game of Mrs. Hannah, who had never got over the loss of her beautiful boy, who had been stolen from her 7 years ago, and they threatened to fall upon Jim and scratch him well if they did not go away at once. Poor Jim did not know what to make of it at all. He was sure he had gone to market with his mother only that morning. He had helped and set out the stall, and gone to the old woman's house, where he had some soup and a little nap. And now, when he came back, they were all talking of 7 years. And they called him a horrid dwarf? Why, what had happened to him? When he found that his mother would really have nothing to do with him, he turned away with tears in his eyes, and went sadly down the streets towards his father's stall. But now we'll see whether he will know me, he thought. I'll stand by the door and talk to him. When he got to the stall, he stood in the doorway and looked in. The cobbler was so busy at work he did not see him for some time, but happening to look up, he caught sight of the visitor, and letting shoes, thread, and everything fall to the ground, he cried with horror, "Good heavens! What is that?" "Good evening, master," said the boy as he stepped in. "How do you do?" "Very ill, little sir," replied the father, to Jim's surprise, for he did not seem to know him. "Business does not go well. I am all alone and getting old, and workman is costly." "But haven't you a son who could learn your degree by trades?" asked Jim. "I had one. He was called Jim, and he would have been a stall turdy lad of 20 by this time, and able to help me well. Why, when he was only 12, he was quite sharp and quick, and hadn't learned many things, but good-looking boy, too, and pleasant, so that customers were taken by him. Well, so goes the world." Thank you for that, hydrate. "But where is your son?" asked Jim with a trembling voice. "Heaven only knows," replied the man. 7 years ago he was stolen from the marketplace, and we have learned no more of him." "7 years ago?" cried Jim with horror. "Yes, indeed, 7 years ago, though it seems but yesterday that my wife came back howling and crying and saying the child had not come back all day. I always thought and said that something of this kind would happen. Jim was a beautiful boy, and everyone made such of him, and my wife was so proud of him, and carried him like the vegetables and things to grand folks' house, and he was petted and made much of. But I used to say, 'Take care, the town is large, there are plenty of bad people in it, keep a sharp eye out on Jim.' And so it happened, for one day an old woman came and bought a lot of things, more than she could carry, so my wife, being a kindly soul, lent the boy, and we have never seen him since." "And that was 7 years ago, you say?" "Yes, 7 years. We had him cried. We went town from town, house to house. Many knew the pretty boy and were fond of him, but it was all in vain. No one seemed to know the old woman who brought the vegetables either. Only one old woman, who was 90 years old, said it might have been the fairy Herbeline, who came into town once every 50 years to buy things." As his father spoke, things grew clearer in Jim's mind, and he saw now that he had not been dreaming, but had really served the old woman 7 years in the shape of a squirrel. As he thought it over, rage filled his heart. 7 years of his youth had been stolen from him, and what had he got in return? To learn how to rub coconuts, and to polish glass floors, and to be taught cooking by guinea pigs. He stood there thinking, till at last his father asked him, "Is there anything I can do for you, young gentleman? Shall I make you a pair of slippers, perhaps?" he said with a smile. "Or
a case for your nose."
"What have you to do with my nose?" asked Jem. "And why should I want a case for it?"
"Well, everyone to his taste," replied the cobbler. "But I must say, if I had such a nose, it would be a nice red leather cover for it. Here's a nice piece, and I think the protection will do you good. As it is, you must constantly be knocking it against things." The lad was dumb with fright. He felt his nose. It was thick and quite 2 hands long. So then the old woman had changed his shape, and that was his own mother did not know him, and called him a horrid dwarf. "Master," said he, "have you got a glass that I could see myself in?" "Young gentleman," was the answer, "your appearance is hardly one to be vain of, and there is no need to waste your time looking in a glass. But I have none here. But if you must have one, you had better ask Urban the barber, who lives over the way, to lend you his. Good morning." So saying, he quickly pushed Jem into the street and shut the door, and went back to his work. Jem stepped across to the barber, whom he had known in the old days. "Good morning, Urban," he said. "May I look at myself in your glass for a moment?" "With pleasure," said the barber, laughing, and all the people in his shop also fell laughing. "You're a pretty youth in your swan-like neck and your white hands and small nose. No wonder you are rather vain, but you look as long as you like yourself." So spoke the barber, and a titter ran around the room. Meanwhile, Jem had stepped up to the mirror and stood gazing sadly at his reflection. Tears came to his eyes. "No wonder you do not know your child again, dear mother," he thought. "It wasn't like this when you were so proud of his looks." His eyes had grown quite small, like a pig's eyes. His nose was huge and hung down over his mouth and chin. His throat seemed to have disappeared altogether, and his head was fixed stiffly between his shoulders. He was no taller than he had been 7 years ago, when he was not much more than a 12-year-old. But he made up with breadth, and his back and chest had grown into lumps like 2 large sacks. His legs were small and spindly, but his arms were as large as those of a well-grown man, with large brown hands and skinny fingers. Then he remembered in the morning when he had first seen the old woman and her threats to him, and without saying a word he left the barber shop. He was determined again to go find his mother, and found her still in the marketplace. He begged her to listen quietly to him, and he reminded her of the day that he went away with the old woman, and of many things of his childhood, and told her how the fairy had bewitched him, and he had served her for 7 years. Hannah did not know what to think. The story was so strange, and it seemed impossible to think a pretty boy and this hideous dwarf were the same. At last he decided to go to her husband about it. He gathered up her baskets and told Jem to follow her, and went straight to the cobbler's stall. "Look here," she cried. "This creature says he is our lost son. He's been telling me how he was stolen 7 years ago and bewitched by a fairy." "Indeed," interrupted the cobbler angrily. "Did he tell you this? Wait a minute, you rascal. Why, I told him all about it myself an hour ago, and then he goes off to humbug you. So you were bewitched, my son, were you? Wait a bit. I'll bewitch you." And saying that, he caught up a bundle of straps and hit out at Jem so hard that he ran off crying. The poor little dwarf roamed around the rest of the day without food or drink. At night he was glad to lie down and sleep on the steps of a church. He woke next morning with the first rays of light and began to think what he could do to earn a living. Suddenly he remembered that he was an excellent cook, and he determined to look out for a place. As soon as it was quite daylight he set out for the palace, for he knew that the Grand Duke who reigned over the country was fond of good things. When he reached the palace, all the servants crowded about him and made fun of him, and at last their shouts and laughter grew so loud that the head steward rushed out crying, "Oh, for goodness' sake, be quiet, can't you? Don't you know His Highness is still asleep?" Some of the servants ran off at once. The others pointed out Jem. Indeed, the steward found it hard to keep himself from laughing at the comic sight, but he ordered the servants off and let the dwarf into his own room. When he heard him ask as the place of the cook, he said, "You make some mistake, my lad. I think you want the Grand Duke's dwarf, don't you?" "No, sir," replied Jim. "I am an experienced cook, and if you will kindly take me as your head cook, may find use of me." "Well, as you will, but believe me, you would have an easier place as a Grand Ducal dwarf." So saying, the head steward led him to the cook's room. "Sir," asked Jim. He bowed till his nose nearly touched the ground. "Do you want an experienced cook?" The head cook looked him over from head to foot and burst out laughing. "You, a cook? Do you suppose our cooking stoves are so low that you can look into the saucepan of them? Oh, my dear fellow, whoever sent you to me wanted me to make fun of you." But the dwarf was not to be put off. "What matters an extra egg or two, or a little butter or flour and the spice or less, in such a house as this?" he said. "Name any dish you wish to have cooked, and give me the materials I ask for, and you shall see." He said much more, and at last persuaded the head cook to give him a trial. They went into the kitchen, a huge place with at least 20 fireplaces, always alight. A little stream of clear water ran through the room, and live fish were kept at one end of it. Everything in the kitchen was of the best and most beautiful kind, and swarms of cooks and scullions were busy preparing dishes. When the head cook came in with Jim, everyone stood quite still. "Was His Highness ordered for luncheon?" asked the head cook. "Sir, His Highness has graciously ordered a Danish soup and red Hamburg dumplings." "Good," said the head cook. "Have you heard? Do you feel equal to make these dishes? Not that you will be able to make the dumplings, for they are a secret recipe." "Is that all?" cried Jem, who had often made both dishes. "Nothing easier. Let me have some eggs, a piece of wild boar, and such roots, and herbs for the soup. And as for the dumplings," he added in a low voice to the head cook, "I shall want 4 different kinds of meat, some wine, a duck's marrow, some ginger, and a herb called heelwell." "Why," cried the astonished cook, "where did you learn cooking? Those are all the exact materials, but never used the herb heelwell, for which I'm sure must be an improvement." And now Jem was allowed to try his hand. He could not nearly reach the kitchen range, but by putting a wide plank on 2 chairs, he managed fairly well. All the cooks stood around to look on, and could not help admiring the quick, clever way in which he set to work. At last, when all was ready, Jim ordered the 2 dishes to be put on the fire till he gave his word. Then he began to count. 1, 2, 3, till he got to 500, and then he cried, "Now!" The saucepans were taken off, and he invited the head cook to taste. The first cook took a golden spoon, washed it and wiped it, and handed it to the head cook, who solemnly approached, tasted the dishes, and smacked his lips over them. "First rate indeed," he exclaimed. "You certainly are a master of the art, little fellow, and the herb heelwell gives a particular relish." As he was speaking, the Duke's valet came to say that His Highness was ready for his luncheon, and it was served at once in silver dishes. The head cook took Jim to his own room, but he had hardly had time to question him before he was ordered to go at once to the Grand Duke. He hurried in his best clothes and followed the messenger. The Grand Duke was looking much pleased. He had emptied the dishes and was wiping his mouth as the head cook came in. "Who cooked my luncheon today?" he asked. "I must say your dumplings are always very good, but I don't think I've ever tasted anything so delicious as they were today. Who made them?" "It's a strange story, Your Highness," said the cook, and told him the whole matter, which surprised the Duke so much that he sent for the dwarf and asked him many questions. Of course, Jim could not say he had been turned into a squirrel, but that he was without parents, and was taught cooking by an old woman. "If you will stay with me," said the Grand Duke, "you shall have 50 ducats a year, besides a new coat and a couple of pairs of trousers. You must undertake to cook my luncheon yourself, and direct what I shall have for dinner, and you shall be called assistant head cook." Jim bowed to the ground, and promised to obey his new master in all things. He lost no time in setting to work, and everyone rejoiced at having him in the kitchen, for the Duke was not a patient man, and had been known to throw plates and dishes at his cooks and servants if the served were not quite to his taste. Now all was changed. He never even grumbled at anything, had 5 meals instead of 3, thought everything was delicious, and grew fatter daily. And so Jim lived on for 2 years, much respected and considered, and only saddened when he thought of his parents. One day he passed like another until the following incident happened. Dwarf Longnose, as he was always called, made a practice of doing his marketing as much as possible himself, and whenever one time came to allowed to the markets to buy poultry and fruit. One morning he had gone to the goose markets, looking at some nice fat geese. No one thought of laughing at his appearance now, for he was known as the cook's special body cook, and every goosewoman felt honored his nose turned their way. He noticed one woman sitting apart with a number of geese, but not crying or praising them like the rest. He went up to her, felt and weighed her geese, and finding them very good, bought 3 and the cage to put them in. He hoisted them on his broad shoulder and set off on his way back. As he went, it struck him that 2 of the geese were gobbling and screaming as geese do, but the third sat quite still, only heaving a deep sigh now, then, like a human being. "That goose is ill," he said. "You must make haste to kill and dress her." But the goose answered him quite distinctly. "Squeeze too tight and I'll bite. If my neck a twist though you gave, I'd bring you to an early grave." Quite frightened, the dwarf set the cage down, and the goose gazed at him with sad, wise-looking eyes, and sighed again. "Good gracious," said Longnose. "So you can speak, Mistress Goose. I never should have thought it. Well, don't be anxious. I know better than to hurt so rare a bird. So I could bet you were not always in this plumage. Wasn't I a squirrel for some time?" "You're right," said the goose. "And supposing I was not born in this horrid shape, and no one ever thought that Mimi, the daughter of the great Weatherbold, would be killed for a decal table." "Well, be quite easy, Mistress Mimi," comforted Jim. "As sure as I'm an honest man and assistant head cook to His Highness, no one shall harm you. I will make a hutch for you in my own rooms, and you shall be well fed, and I'll come and talk to you as much as I can. I'll tell you all the other cooks that I'm fattening up a goose for very special food for the Grand Duke, but at the first opportunity I will set you free." The goose thanked him with tears in her eyes, but the dwarf kept his word. He killed the other 2 geese for dinner and built a little shed for Mimi in one of his rooms. Under the pretense of fattening her under his own eyes, he spent all his spare time talking to her and comforting her, and fed her on all the daintiest dishes. They consorted their histories to each other, and Jim learned that the goose was the daughter of the wizard Weatherbold, who lived on the island of Gothland. He fell out with an old fairy who got the better of him by cunning and treachery, and to revenge herself turned his daughter into a goose and carried her off to a distant place. When Longnose told her his story, she said, "I know little on these matters, and what you say shows me that you are under an herb enchantment. That is to say, what if you can find the herb whose smell woke you up, and the spell will be broken." This was but a small comfort for Jim, for now and where he was to find the herb. About this time the Grand Duke had a visit of the neighboring prince, a friend of his, who sent Longnose and said to him, "Now is the time to show what you can really do. The prince is staying with me as better dinners than anyone except myself, and is a great judge of cooking. As long as he is here, you must take at my table what be served in manner to surprise him constantly. At the same time, on pain of my own displeasure, take care that no dish shall appear twice. Get everything you wish and spare nothing. If you want to melt down gold and precious stones, do so. I would rather be a poor man than have this blouche before him." The dwarf bowed and answered, "Your highness shall be obeyed. I will do all in my power to please you and the prince." From this time the little cook was hardly seen except in the kitchen, where, surrounded by his helpers, he gave orders, baked, stewed, flavored, and dished up all manners of dishes. The prince had been a fortnight with the duke, and enjoyed himself mightily. They ate 5 times a day, and the duke had every reason to be content with the dwarf's talents, for he saw how pleased his guest looked. On the 15th day the duke sent for the dwarf and presented him to the prince. "You are a wonderful cook," said the prince, "and certainly know what is good. All the time I've been here you have never repeated a dish, and all were excellent. But tell me why you've never served the queen of all dishes, the Sazerain pastry." The dwarf felt frightened, for he had never heard of this queen of pastries before, but he did not lose his patience of mind, and replied, "I have waited, hoping that your highness' visit here would some time, and I propose to celebrate the last day with this truly royal dish." "Indeed," cried the Grand Duke, "I suppose you would have waited for the day of my death to treat it to me, for if you had never sent it up to me yet. However, if you have to invent some other farewell dish, for the pastry must be on my table tomorrow." "As your highness pleases," said the dwarf, and took leave. But it did not please him at all. The moment of disgrace seemed to be at hand, for he had no idea how to make this pastry. He went to his rooms very sad, and sat there lost in thoughts. The goose Mimi, who was left free to walk about, and came up to him, asked him what the matter was. When she heard, she said, "Cheer up, my friend. I know the dish quite well. We often had it at home, but I can guess pretty well how it was made." And she told him what was put in it, and adding, "I think that will be all right. If some trifle is left out, perhaps they won't find it." Sure enough, the next day the magnificent pastry was wreathed all around with flowers and placed on the table. Jim himself put on his best clothes and went into the dining hall. He had entered. The head carver was in the act of cutting the pie and helping the duke and his guests. The Grand Duke took a large mouthful and threw his eyes up as he swallowed it. Oh, this may be called the Queen of Pastries, and all of the time my dwarf must have been called the King of Cooks. Don't you think so, my dear friend?" The prince took several small pieces, tasted, and examined carefully, then said with a mysterious and sarcastic smile, "The dish is very nice, but the scissoring is not quite complete, as I expected." The Grand Duke flew into a rage. "Dog of a cook!" he shouted. "How dare you serve me so? I've a good mind to chop your great head off as punishment." "For mercy's sake, your highness, I made the pastry according to my rules. I left nothing out. Ask the prince what else I should put in." The prince laughed. "I was sure you could not make the dish as well as my cook, Longnose. No, then, the herb I was wanting is called relish, which is not known in this country, but which gives the pastry its particular flavor, and without your master will never taste its perfection." The Grand Duke was more furious than ever. "But I will taste it to perfection," he roared. "Either the pastry must be made properly tomorrow, or this rascal's head shall come off. Go, scoundrel, I give you 24 hours' respite." The poor dwarf hurried back to his room and poured out his grief to the goose. "Oh, is that all?" she said. "Then I can help you, for my father taught me how to know all plants and herbs.
Luckily, this is a new moon just now, and the herb only springs up at such times. But tell me, are there any chestnut trees near the place?"
"Oh, yes," said Longnose, much relieved. "Near the lake, only a couple 100 yards from the palace. There's a large clump of them. But why do you ask?"
"Because the herb only grows at the roots of chestnut trees," replied Mimi. "So let us no time in finding it. Take me under your arm and put me down at the door, and I'll hunt it for you."
He did as she bade, and as soon as they were in the garden they put them on the ground, and they waddled off as fast as they could towards the lake, Jem hurrying after her with an anxious heart, for he knew that his life depended on her success. The goose hunted everywhere, but in vain. She searched under each chestnut, and turning every blade of grass with her bill, nothing to be seen, and evening was drawing on. Suddenly the dwarf noticed an old tree standing alone on the other side of the lake. "Look!" cried he. "Let us try our luck there." The goose fluttered and skipped in front, and he ran after as fast as his little legs could carry him. The tree cast a wide shadow, and it was almost dark beneath it. But suddenly the goose stood still and flapped her wings with joy, and plucked something which she had held out of her astonished friend, and saying,
"There it is, and there is more growing here, and you will have no lack of it."
The dwarf stood gazing at the plant. It gave out a strong, sweet scent which reminded him of the day of his enchantment. The stems and leaves were bluish green, and bore a dark red flower with a yellow edge. "What a wonder!" replied Longnose. "I do believe this is the very herb which changed me from a squirrel into my present miserable form. Shall I try an experiment?"
"Not yet," said the goose. "Take a good handful of the herb with you, and let us go to your rooms. We'll collect all your money and clothes together, and then we'll test the powers of the herb."
So they went back to Jem's room, where he gathered together some 50 ducats he had saved, his clothes and his shoes, and tied them up in a bundle. Then he plunged his face into the bunch of herbs, and drew it on the perfume. As he did so, all his limbs began to crack and stretch, and he felt his head rising above his shoulders. He glanced down at his nose, and saw it grow smaller and smaller. His chest and back grew flat, his legs grew long. The goose looked on in amazement.
"Oh, how big and beautiful you are!" she cried. "Thank heaven, you are quite changed."
Jem folded his hands in thanks, and his heart swelled in gratitude. But his joy did not make him forget he owed all to his friend Mimi. "I owe you my life and my release," he said. "Without you I should have never regained my natural shape, and indeed would soon have been beheaded. And I will take you back to your father, who will certainly know how to disenchant you." The goose accepted this offer with joy, and they managed to slip out of the palace unnoticed by anyone. Though they got through the journey without accident, the wizard soon realized his daughter, and loaded Jem with thanks and valuable presents. He lost no time in hastening back to his native town, and his parents were ready to recognize the handsome, well-made young man as their long-lost son. With the money given him by the wizard, he opened a shop, which prospered rather well, and he lived long and happily. I must not forget to mention that much disturbance was caused in the palace by Jem's sudden disappearance. But when the Grand Duke sent orders next day to behead the dwarf, if he could be found, the necessary herbs, the dwarf was not to be found. The prince hinted that the Duke had allowed his cook to escape, and had therefore broken his word. The matter had ended in a great war between the two princes, and was known in history as the Herb War. After many battles and much loss of life, and peace was finally concluded, and this peace became known as the Pastry Peace, because of the banquet given in honor of its prince's cook dished up the Queen of Pastries, the Caesarine, and the Grand Duke declared it to be quite excellent.